We want to help you be the very best missionary so that you can give your very best to the people you're serving. What makes this podcast unique is it's done by missionaries for missionaries. How can we take timeless principles and apply them to our lives as missionaries? That's really our heart behind this. Welcome to this episode of Modern Day Missionaries. Today, we have my friend Nic Lesmeister with us. And Nic, I could not be happier to have you here with us today. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Stephanie. It's an honor to be on this podcast. I've been following it for a while now, and just do an amazing job. So I'm really grateful to be here.
Thanks. We're honored to have you. And I just want to share a little bit about Nic with y'all. Nic is the executive pastor for Church and Jewish Relations at Gateway Church in Southlake, Texas, which is Pastor Robert and Debbie Morris's church. And he's also the executive director of Gateway Center for Israel. And Nic and his team there help steward over 250 different global ministry partnerships that are related to Israel, to the Jewish people, all for Gateway Church. And so just love the work that you do there, Nic. It's pretty incredible. I've gotten to see some of the videos that you guys put out on a weekly basis. I know you were in Israel all the time. Thank you for what you do in that space.
Oh, yeah. It's an honor to serve Pastor Robert and really serve the body of Jewish believers worldwide who are growing. And we just really feel thankful to be in relationship with them and learn from them. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And beyond that, you have a heart for missions. So not just for Israel, not just for the church, but you work with missionaries regularly. You've lived overseas yourself. And Nic is a brilliant leader. And so what he's going to share with us today, I believe it's really going to sharpen our minds and our hearts. But Nic, before we get started, I want to let people get to know you a little bit more. So I'm going to shoot some unprepared. You don't know these are coming. Rapid fire questions your way.
I don't. Full disclosure, I have not seen this list of questions, so we are going to get raw, unedited responses.
Yes, this is
which
what I
could be
love.
dangerous.
Okay, Nic, here we go. Which do you prefer, socks or barefoot?
Definitely socks.
Socks. What kind of socks do you like?
Usually like ankle cut. Honestly, this is a thing for me. So, if I have to take a trip, you talked about going on mission trips.
Yeah.
I will change my socks before I change any other article of clothing. They have to be changed first. So yeah, I'm a socks person. I don't even
Okay,
walk around in my own home barefoot. It's nasty. I'm not doing that.
Okay, so in your carry-on, there are certainly extra socks. Every time.
Yes, there are.
Okay. All right. Next one. Nic, ocean, river, or lake?
River.
River.
Yeah.
Is there a particular river?
No, I think that I have learned as I've gotten older, I just turned 40, that to recharge, one of the things that just recharges me in nature is running water. So I do love the ocean, but at the same time, it's sticky and it's humid. And I like rivers because you can get to dry, cool places with rivers.
I
So,
like that. I like
yeah.
that. Okay, Nic, worst food you've ever tried?
Oh my goodness, the worst food I've ever tried. Okay, we're talking. This is a missions podcast. I was in Ethiopia about 10 years ago, and we were in someone's home. And as all of you missionaries know, when you're in the home of an indigenous person that you're building a relationship with, you just eat what they put before you. So I'm eating, and then a dish comes, and it has a very red color. Let me just put it like that. And it's blobby. And I found out later that it was basically ground up sheep intestines.
Oh my
So
gosh. And you
definitely
ate
the
it.
worst food I've ever ate. Yeah.
You did eat it.
Yeah, thank God I didn't get sick. I don't know how. I don't know how. I did the whole trick where you push it around the plate, but
Yeah.
they were pretty insistent that I consume it. And I just said, Lord, in Jesus' name, here we go.
Props to you. I feel like you're getting some street cred right now here with all the missionaries. They're like, yes, he is one of us.
I've been around the block. Yeah.
Okay, Nic, what movie did you watch on repeat as a kid?
Oh man. Okay. There's a movie that first comes to my mind that I'm not going to say because I don't want my credibility to go down.
Okay.
Probably my favorite movie this is going to wow, my head is going in so many different directions. Um, I watched Chitty Bang Bang a lot. That was one I watched a lot.
Okay,
Yeah.
vintage.
Yeah, very vintage. Yeah. The other
Yes.
one that it just came flying into my head, this is gonna betray where I grew up a little bit, but was Days of Thunder. I don't even know if anybody knows that, but it was a movie about NASCAR. It was probably Tom Cruise's worst decision in his professional career, where he played a NASCAR driver. But, my uncle owned a dirt track race car in western rural Minnesota, and we would go to the racetrack every weekend, so I was fascinated with race cars, so, yeah.
Okay, so that was pretty cool too at that time.
Yeah, oh, big time.
Oh,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
And
Okay.
he drove the number 42 Mellow Yellow, which, as a kid, I love Mellow Yellow. I mean, we're deep cutting now. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't a Mountain Dew fan. That was for jokers, Mellow Yellow was the legit
Mellow
drink.
yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, what's one book you're reading right now?
I'm reading a book called Catch 67. It's about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict post Six-Day War, which happened in June of 1967. And it dives into this sort of almost irreparable divide between the Israeli right wing and the Israeli left wing, and looks at some different practical ways of what he's a Jewish author named Mika Goodman, and he's suggesting instead of looking at ending the conflict in Israel, we should look at shrinking, how to shrink the conflict. So it's pretty fascinating.
That sounds fascinating. I can
Yeah.
already hear a few people probably jotting that down, wanting to add it to their reading list.
He's a phenomenal philosopher. Yeah, Mika Goodman.
Yeah. And so you guys lived in Jerusalem for a time, right? Was it you and Tabitha that both lived there?
Yeah. Yeah, we did. We moved there in the fall of 2014 so I could do a master's degree at Hebrew University. The Hebrew University, it's not a school that only teaches Hebrew. It's like the main university in Israel. And our daughter was 3 when we moved there, and then we had a surprise in having our second was born there, our son in 2015.
Wow. So you guys have lived cross-culturally. You've
We
had
did. Yeah,
that
we
experience.
lived in the Middle East, and we really experienced the tension of it. We were there when, there were a lot of terrorist attacks, and just got to live the reality of a lot of people, and really began to understand what it was like, to be a Jewish and Arab citizen of Israel.
Yeah, and having a baby overseas, I mean, that makes you extra legit right there.
Yeah, that was not planned. So that's a whole whole 'nother story, but it was exciting nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay, and let's talk for a second about your passion for and involvement with missions because Nick, you helped birth Modern Day back when it began in 2008 and you're still on the board at this point. You
Yeah, I do.
love missionaries.
I do. Yeah. I mean, I just was telling a colleague of mine today, I'm so proud of Modern Day.
Mm.
And I maybe you and I were emailing about this, or maybe it was me talking to Marvin, but I keep thinking of Modern Day as sort of like little Modern Day because for so long it was just like some little dream that we had. We never imagined that it would grow into what it has grown into today. And you, Stephanie, have been such a key part of helping Modern Day grow into even greater areas to help missionaries. But this is what was in our heart when Marvin and I were young and in our 20s, and Elias was younger. And, we're just dreaming of a day where missionaries could focus on doing what God called them to do and didn't have to deal with all of the headache of raising money and donation receipts.
Mhm.
And so it just was how we felt God showed us we could play a part in just greasing the wheels for missions, and helping missionaries accomplish what they need to do, and taking the burden off of churches as well to begin to be able to kind of send missionaries and focus more on the relationship component and less on the administrative side. So it's really to me, one of my most proud achievements in life, is just being a part of it.
Well, and it should be. I'm glad you feel that way because I mean, as modern day missionaries ourselves for the last, 8 or 9 years, I am so grateful that it exists. I really am. I mean, any institution or organization that's helping get missionaries on the field when we need them more than ever. I'm so, so blessed by it. And that really, I think, is how this conversation got started today when you and I were talking. You really had some things that you felt like you wanted to share with missionaries. Again, you've got that perspective, you've got the heart for it, you've lived cross culturally. And when I had asked you what was going on in your heart in terms of what you wanted to share, You knew right away. It just came flying out of you. And you told me it was 3 self-limiting beliefs that are robbing you slowly. And I mean, I wanted to pull out my notebook right then and there. And so I'd love to just jump into those and hear, um, what about this topic of self-limiting beliefs rang so true for you when you thought about how it applies to missionaries and global workers?
Well, yeah, you mentioned in the intro that I oversee a team and we relate to around 250 different Jewish ministry partnerships. So another way of calling that is missionaries, missions organizations, if you want to say it like that.
Mhm.
And so I interact with missionaries every day and leaders of organizations and I led a not missions nonprofit after I moved home from Jerusalem for about 4 years. And so I got to experience firsthand just the pressure and the reality of fundraising and living, on a fundraised budget and doing all the things of casting vision and, managing projects internationally. We were active in 12 different countries, this organization, and all over the world, from Asia to Africa to Europe to South America. And so I learned through my own experiences of leading that organization what was on my heart to share today, just what is a self-limiting belief. And a lot of what I went through, I learned in a process that was facilitated for me by Dr. John Townsend. And I wasn't really aware of some of these leadership capacities that were limiting me personally, which then in turn limited the fruitfulness of the organization. And I just was more focused on, okay, what's the vision? What's the budget? What's the strategic plan? Kind of all the things that I learned more from my previous career in the business world. And then I began to slowly realize, wait, there's some things actually in my own character structure, like internally for me, and that's actually what's limiting my own personal growth, the growth of my own personal relationships, and the growth of my professional relationships, and then ultimately the growth of my ministry. And so now sitting in the seat that I do at Gateway, this is sort of a recurring issue that I see with other leaders. It's kind of a pervasive thing. So that's why I even titled it like I did, because I feel that there are some self-limiting beliefs, and what they do is they really do rob you slowly, almost unaware. You're almost unaware of them. And a lot of times they're hard to put your finger on. And so I hope that I've learned some things, and I'm just sharing this because I learned this. I see this happening a lot in the missions world, so hopefully it just brings some clarity and kind of lifts a burden off some people and gives them some fresh faith and hope, on maybe some things they're sorting through.
Yeah, okay, so you've experienced this personally by identifying these self-limiting beliefs in you, and so putting them into place in your life has really changed things, and then you've also been able to share them as a leader with other leaders and see the transformation that's taken place in them. So, okay, at this point, I mean, we're primed. I really would like to hear number 1.
Sure. Well, I think it's good to start and just kind of define. It's a little bit of like a
Yes.
clinical term. What's a self-limiting belief? And Michael Hyatt, who's a really prolific, like business coach, he defines a self-limiting belief as an understanding of the present that shortchanges our future.
That's
And
good.
they're basically thoughts and paradigms of thinking that influence the way that we live. They're assumptions, perceptions that we have about ourselves and the way that the world works that can be rooted in a past experience. They can be developed by comments we hear about ourselves from others. They can be developed by values, um, stories that we've told ourselves that haven't been necessarily challenged. This is something I talk about a lot with leaders when we define what a self-limiting belief is I just ask them, maybe I'll hear them say something like, well, I just don't think that we're going to be able to have the resources necessary to accomplish XYZ. And I'll just kindly say, "Who told you that? Where did you hear that?" And a lot of times, especially as it relates to us, we might say, "Well, I just don't have it in me to do this," or "I don't have that kind of faith," or "I always mess this up," stuff like this, right? These are things that all of us say, and it's just great sometimes to think, "Wait, where did that come from? Like, who told me that?" It wasn't God. God wouldn't say that. He doesn't speak like that. And when we read his word, we learn that. And so then, well, maybe I heard it from a friend, but ultimately that story usually comes from the voice of God's adversary, the enemy, the devil. And so it's just this idea that we all have this internal voice that's spewing these self-limiting beliefs that we develop, and we kind of hold on to them, and they do affect our trajectory. So the first one that I learned first, I probably have had the hardest time integrating into my own life, is that this idea that vulnerability is weakness. And if you think about this, most leaders aren't naturally vulnerable. And most of the things that we have prized as sort of leadership qualities are the antithesis of vulnerability. It's sort of this idea of like the leader's supposed to know everything. You're supposed to always have a plan. The plan's always supposed to work. You're always supposed to have an answer for things. You're never supposed to be sad. You're never supposed to be lonely. You're never supposed to be, without an answer about what the Bible says about this or whatever. And so the idea of vulnerability and like exposing what we're feeling or what's actually going on inside of us, we develop this belief that that's weakness. And
Mm.
it's totally robs us when we think about it that way. Vulnerability really is the greatest tool sometimes that we can have. And I think of an example from my own life. I was leading this ministry, and we had a donor who had been giving money for quite a few years towards a specific initiative, and it was in a country that was really sensitive, and we couldn't get the funds to this country. And so a lot of people might be able to relate to this. So we didn't have an advanced accounting structure at this organization I was leading, and so the money just went into a bank account. And so time went by, and the leader of the ministry in this other country never really requested the funds. Well, then all of a sudden the donor wrote in and said, "Hey, we need to get money over to this country, and I found out that it's not being sent. What's going on?" Well, we had amassed, let's say 50, I think it was like 50 to $75,000, and that was sort of owed on a balance, and well, it was just at a point in the month where our cash flow was low. And so the bottom line is the donor said, "I want that money to come back and I'm going to send it over there." Well, we didn't have the funds to return his donations. So, what did I do? I had some money set aside in like an emergency thing, and I put it into the organization as like a temporary loan to try to get us through. I didn't tell my board, I didn't tell my overseer. I just thought, I'm going to fix this problem. And I don't want anybody to see that I didn't know what I was doing. That would be catastrophic in my mind. That didn't work. And so ultimately, I had to write an email to uh, the board and just say, "Look, guys, this is what's going on, and we don't have the money." And I'll never forget that it was really hard for me to do that. And about 3 hours later, I got a phone call from one of our board members who is a wealthy person, and they just said, "Nick, I read your email," and they said, "No one should have to feel what you're feeling and be under the weight of debt, and we're sending in a check tomorrow to pay that debt off."
Wow.
And I remember where I was sitting, Stephanie, because I felt like this is so backwards. Like I just admitted my own weakness to you, and now just like that, I'm getting to experience the reward of it. So it really showed me that, man, the people love me, and they didn't expect me to be perfect. I thought that they expected me to be perfect, but they didn't. And so my lack of being vulnerable was actually holding me back from being able to engage my donors to like really walk with me and say, what are your needs? Like, where are you stuck? And I didn't want to tell them where I was stuck. I wanted them to think I had the great plan and everything. And so that's number one, that the self-limiting belief that if I'm vulnerable, I'm going to get hurt for it, or it's going to be perceived as weakness. And
And
it
that's really
doesn't.
significant, Nick, because missionaries, I think, deal with that on a huge basis.
Yeah.
I think every leader, to your point, really can struggle with vulnerability. It's become a little bit, I don't want to use the word trendy, but it's become more acceptable. I think thanks to people like Brene Brown who are encouraging, and a lot of other
Yeah.
people too are encouraging people to open up, to be honest, to share what's really going on. But even in that space, I think in the mission space, it's scary because your finances depend on people giving to you. And so the wrong step and you could lose a donor. And so you hope that it's going to be a best case scenario, like what you said, but vulnerability always carries risk. But to your point, I think a lot of times we assume that people are going to react a lot more poorly than they actually do when there is real relationship there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And you do need to be wise. You shouldn't just, cast out an email to all your donors, it says, "Oh, the house is on fire and I'm thinking about leaving my family," or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We have to be sensitive, but all of us, if we really look at who our key friends are, who our key supporters are, they care about us. They're invested in us. And
Yeah.
the reason why they're supporting us financially or walking with us is because, yes, they're excited about our mission. But I've really found, even in sitting in my chair, when a leader comes to me and says, "Hey, we need X amount of dollars to do this project." And I begin to ask them some questions. Well, how are you doing personally? And they begin to open up to me. My heart is more moved to help them on the basis of, I just want to walk with you. I want to put courage in your tank. And okay, sure, we'll help with this project. It's important. Wonderful. But you are important. God
Mm.
gave you the vision, God gave you the mission. And yes, the things that you do with your hands are important. But if you're not healthy, then none of this matters. And so all of us need to just kind of remind ourselves that there are people in our lives that are in our corner, they're with us. And a lot of times it just rises and falls on our willingness to really open up and take a risk and share some things that are hard. And I've almost always seen God bless people when they do that. Really meet their need, find acceptance, and really get a deeper relationship with people. And it's just so much more personally healthy.
Well, and it's the right decision to make regardless of the outcome. Because
Right.
if we aren't vulnerable, what's motivating that? It's fear, tons of
Yeah.
fear. It could be shame. There's not pride. It could be pride. There's not something positive behind that. If we're not being vulnerable, if we're hiding things, if we have secrets, I think that reveals to us something about us. And maybe
Yeah.
it reveals something to us about the kind of relationships we have. Do we not have people in our corner? Do we need to
Yeah.
develop some new healthy relationships? And we're not being vulnerable looking for yes men and yes women.
Yeah.
We're being vulnerable looking for people who can speak the truth into our lives in love.
Yeah.
And maybe it is like, hey, all of my people who are in my corner are telling me it's time for me to get off the field, or there's a huge issue in my life I need to fix.
Yeah.
Well, what value is that to me to hide that?
Right.
No, I
Yeah.
got to deal with that. So you
Yeah.
can't lose with vulnerability, even if it looks like you do
Yeah,
initially.
absolutely. It's true. And I think I had grown really good at transparency. I was good at making it seem like I was being vulnerable. And a lot of people are more comfortable just being transparent. And the distinctive between transparency and vulnerability is what you just said, Stephanie, is vulnerability is essentially putting yourself out there with the risk that someone actually might not accept you or might do something with that information that could be bad for you. But that's where most of us have people in our lives that are safe enough to where that isn't going to happen. But it's literally almost putting yourself in their hands and saying,
Yeah.
knowing what you know about me now, do you still love me? And we need to learn to find that affirmation. We have to build this skill. It's a muscle you have to exercise of being vulnerable and asking people, "Hey, now that you know how I handled this or what I was thinking, do you still think I'm valuable? Do you still think I'm right for this role?" And when you hear them say, "Absolutely, yes, God loves you. We're with you." It just begins to build your confidence to where you can face some of these self-limiting beliefs and these negative realities with a lot more strength, knowing that, man, I'm known. People know me. I'm not have to be afraid of anything. There's no skeletons in my closet.
Mm, that's really significant. I like that one, Nick. Okay,
Yeah.
makes me want to hear the next one. What's number two?
Yeah. So the next one that kind of you know, um, feeds into this is just it's a phrase or an idea that I think can be adopted by anybody that's working on something that's hard. And all of us who are in missions know that's essentially our job. We're trying to bring change to places that aren't just easy. And so it's the idea that I'll never change or things will never change. And really what it is it's a fixed mentality versus a growth mentality. And any of us can kind of fall into this. I hear myself say stuff like this all the time. I There's a phrase, never say always and never. It's kind of ironic to say,
That is the truth.
but it's true. And even in my parenting, I find myself, I always try to avoid that because it's just such a fixed way of thinking. This will never change, or I'm never going to be good at this, or, we're never going to get funding for this, or these people are never gonna, receive what we're trying to do in ministry for them, or they always tell us that they don't want us around, and so it can be really negative, to think like this, but I think it can affect all of us, and uh, and and so we just get into this pattern of belief to where we slowly start to accept a reality that's not true, and that God can't step in and change. And I think at the heart of it is a lot of people just have a hard time admitting when things are outside of our control, that we tried everything and nothing's working, And so but that's where the power of God comes in, where we say, God, I have no idea. I have tried everything, and it feels like this will never change. But I do know that you can make a way where there is no way. I do know that you can turn things around and that somehow you can help me figure this thing out. But it can be just a way of thinking that we can sink into and on a daily basis, even just this idea that I've got this issue, it's never going to go away. Or especially when we try something, maybe we try to do it a different way and we get the same result. And you can just start to just be dejected by saying that I'm never going to break through here, or this is never going to work, or these knuckleheads are never going to listen to me,
I
but fill in
appreciate
the
the
blank.
reality of what you're saying there in terms of those feelings, because those
Yeah.
are really real feelings.
Yeah.
And yet what you're saying is a really sobering, Nick, because you're saying when we say those things, we're essentially looking at God and saying, you can't fix this. This
Yeah.
is too big for you. God, I finally found the thing that is too big for you.
Yeah.
And what a sobering thought
Yeah.
that we would be not just feeling that way, but projecting that shit,
Mhm.
saying that to God, telling him what he can and can't do.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just that I do feel like this is something that people who are, on the missions field or just in ministry, we are just constantly trying to bring change to things that don't really wanna change, I mean, yes, people on the whole, they have their moments where they're like they come in your office and they sit down and say, "Help me, I wanna change." Most of the time, it's the opposite. You're trying to slowly coach people and getting them to kind of accept, "You need to change," you know? And so it's just hard. The work that we do is hard. So therefore it's easy to fall into this thinking that I don't know if I'm ever going to see anything different happen here. It's just always going to be like this, or this is my lot in life. And so then 10 years go by with some people and they become bitter and reluctant, and it's really sad.
Nick, you know what that's making me think too? Sometimes when I've wanted to change something and it hasn't changed, I've realized the change didn't need to take place there, but it needed to
Mhm.
take place in me.
Yeah.
So there are moments when we're trying to change something that is not supposed to be changed.
Mhm.
And so we're hitting up against a brick wall, and it's not that it can't be changed. It's not meant to be. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's a moment to look internally and say, Lord, I mean, even in a relationship, you think about a relationship where one person is trying to change the other person. And so sometimes it's time to look a little bit introspectively and go, okay, God, maybe I'm coming at this from a different angle.
Yeah.
How could I
Absolutely.
look at myself? Oh, that's really good. Really
Yeah.
good.
Well, I think about Romans 12, we all know the scripture, right? That, don't conform to the patterns of this world. I was just giving this illustration to my daughter the other night, and she had some silly putty she was playing with. I was trying to explain to her, what does conform mean? We were trying to talk to her about conforming. And so I said, "Oh, hey, this is a perfect example." I said, Give me your silly putty." So I took her silly putty, I made it really flat, and then she was sitting with her knee, and so I put it over her kneecap and I pushed on it. And then I opened it up. I said, "Look at this. It looks like your knee, right? Like that putty conformed. It took shape of your knee." And I said, "That's what the writer of well, Paul is saying here is he's saying, don't take the shape of the pattern of this world, the thinking of this world." And then what do you say? But be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Or I think the NLT says that, um, let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And so that's ultimately what we have to do. That's what a growth mindset does is, instead of saying fixed mindset of like, it's like this or it's like this. I tell people all the time, like for me, one of the most relieving things that ever happened to me when I was going through an intense season of growth is I felt so much relief by just being able to tell my wife, my kids, my coworkers, "Hey guys, I'm growing." Like, that was it for me, and it relieved me so much to just kind of accept that I'm growing, like, I'm a work in progress. And I don't have to have it all worked out by next Friday or and I don't even know, maybe I won't even get to where I thought I would be, in the next 10 years. But the for me, the point is I'm just growing. I'm like, I'm in God's hands, I'm letting myself be changed by the way I think, and letting God shape me, conform me, transform my mind. And so it's easier said than done. we have we have to isolate these patterns of thinking
Mhm.
and when they kind of come through our mind, grab them, and go, whoa, whoa, what was that? Be more aware of them.
Yeah, which so often I think can take place in community really well because when we're trying to change, having other people's voices maybe show us blind spots, point things out to us. Um, I think of something I tried to change when we moved to Peru is I was a very timely person. I liked everything to be on time. And that is not Latin American culture. It's event orientation, not time orientation. And I felt frustrated when people were late and I thought they were lying to me because they said they would be there and they weren't.
Mhm.
And I realized it was not up to me to change that. That was
Yeah.
a beautiful part of culture in the sense that once people did come up or did come and showed up, they were so fully present and fully there in a way that I had never experienced. So there are times when it's great to work for change externally or internally. And then there's times where it's great to accept that God's doing something different. And how can I participate that it's going back to your growth mindset. How can I
Mm.
grow into
Yeah.
what God has for me? Such a good point. Okay, what's number 3?
So the last one, and I think this tends to be if you're a leader of an organization, of a ministry, or of a department of a ministry, I think this one can sneak into everybody at all times. And it's this idea that it's all up to me. That if no one does this, if I don't do this, no one else will. If I don't make this happen, it's never going to happen. And I think it actually can be somewhat toxic in the infusion of some of our own theology because sometimes we don't realize we fall into this sort of servant or slave mentality with the Father, where we almost feel like He is the one saying, like, hey, I gave you this vision. I entrusted you with these resources, with these people. I sent you to this country. What are you doing with it? And so we just like internalize this. We build up this conversation hypothetically with God, and then we begin to take on this idea like what's all up to me. God expects me to do X, Y, Z, or God expects me to have this done by this amount of time. And if I don't do it, I'm letting him down. I'm letting other people down. And there's definitely God is all about accountability, but from a place of love and acceptance, you know. And so I see this all the time with leaders. It just kind of comes out. You hear it, and this is why a lot of people don't take a day off. They don't rest. They don't take a Sabbath because they think, man, if I'm not in there getting things done, it isn't going to get done. And so we then become kind of like the masters of our own domains. And in some ways, we kind of elbow God out of the way and we're saying, "Well, I don't really need God." I mean, like he and I thought this for years when I led this nonprofit is just God gave me the skills and the qualities and the giftings, the anointings, whatever you want to call it, to lead this organization. And the board expects me to get this stuff done. And then I just took on this idea, then so does God. And so therefore, it leads to isolation emotionally because you're the only person that can determine your success. And unfortunately, most of us aren't that good, as leaders. And so we mess up. And so then who's the only person that we can blame? Ourselves. So then we get into this really ugly self-talk with ourselves of, man, you screwed up again? Oh, well, I got to fix this. I got to fix this. And so then what does it do? It leads to a lack of vulnerability. And it goes back to kind of what we talked about early already is
Pride.
we can't be vulnerable because we think they expected me to do this and I screwed up, you know? And so it's what I call and a lot of people call catastrophic thinking. You know, it's just we think things and we internalize things on these really catastrophic levels, and this is where you hear things like I'll never change or that's never going to happen. And we think these big, big looming clouds. And instead of saying, hey, other people can help, and if I don't get this right, that's okay. Um, someone else can come around and help guide me. And, And so it's just a way that we limit ourselves and tricking ourselves into different variations of thinking that it's all up to us. And it's just not. It's not all up to us. We are servants, but more than that, we're sons and daughters. And God wants
Yeah.
a loving son and daughter relationship with us. And yes, he wants us to be fruitful, but he's not looking to kill us in order for us to be fruitful. And I think sometimes we don't make that integration. We go too far with it as leaders. And in ministry and missions, it's just so easy to do that because you've got donors who are asking you what's going on. How many people came to that event? When are you launching this? When's the next time you're going to do this outreach? And you just take on this thought that like if I don't get this done and if I don't do it right, then only I can do it. And it just sneaks in on us.
That is a heavy burden to bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. So considering these things, Nick, what would be, for people who are listening, what would be one small step that missionaries could take to begin to put some of what we talked about into practice?
I think one is just becoming aware of what you're thinking, how you're saying. Like I said, the stories that you tell yourselves. I was actually talking to my daughter last night about this, and I said, you know what? I said 1 month, I decided to just give myself some homework, and I wanted to become more aware of what was going on inside me, inside my head, inside my heart. And so I said 3 times a day, I asked myself, okay, 9 o'clock, 12 noon, and 8 p.m., whatever, pick times. I asked myself 3 times a day, what am I feeling right now? Or how am I feeling right now? Because I'm not a person that's really, I wasn't naturally kind of prone to being aware of what was going on inside me and my own thought patterns. I'm like always processing things. And it was so helpful for me to just stop and begin to go, okay, what am I feeling right now? And then I would kind of work through what was going on, and I'd come to a kind of a conclusion, and then every once in a while, I would sort of test that out, like with my wife or with somebody else, and just say, "I think I feel kind of anxious, and I think I'm feeling anxious because I've scheduled this lunch like 3 months ago, and I don't know, I don't really want to go, and so it's making me anxious, and I'm a little bit antsy, and so I think just becoming aware of what's going on in our heads, what's going on in our hearts, and then really developing these like real relational components, like finding people in our lives that are
Yeah.
safe, trustworthy, and just begin kind of flexing the muscle and exercising vulnerability and just opening up and saying, hey, um, I've just been thinking like, I don't think this is ever going to change. Could you speak into that for me? Or
Yeah.
I'm feeling like if I don't get this done, it's all gonna be screwed up. Could you give me a different story? Is there a different story I should be thinking of? So, we just need one another.
Okay, what a
And
good link then. So you're talking about first becoming aware, because as you said, it doesn't matter if somebody's hyperly self aware.
yeah,
Most people don't know what's going on inside their heads.
yeah,
It's interesting that your question was, how am I feeling right now? So about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I had heard something somewhere and had the very same question. So I put an alarm on my phone for 5 times a day, and the alarm said, "What are you thinking right now?" And so mine was a
wow,
thinking. I wanted to catch some of
yeah,
those tape recorder statements that were going through my head, and I did it for maybe 2 weeks. And I remember at the end, I sat down and I analyzed it for patterns. And it
mm,
was really,
yeah,
really interesting. And what you're doing is so good, because I hadn't really thought, I don't know that I did this when I tracked mine, but you took your feelings and then you brought them to a safe relationship and you processed them. And I think that would have been a good thing for me to even do too. I just was like, oh, this is really interesting to see what it is that I'm thinking. And I took it to the Lord. But to your point, yes, take it to the Lord, but also
yeah,
take it to people. And when you get in the habit of asking yourself, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? It becomes a little bit more natural. You suddenly start hearing the things you're saying to yourself, and you have words that you can put before somebody and say, "Hey, I'm saying this. Is this true? Do you see this in me?" Or some things we can just look at and go, "This is obviously not from the
you're right.
Lord."
Yeah, 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 exactly, it's true, and I think it really is, for people in a missions world, in a ministry world, we really we have a hard job, and I think sometimes we maybe even minimize how hard it is. It's okay to actually say out loud, this is really hard.
Yeah.
And you don't have to pretend like it's not, or that you're on a spiritual high all the time. And and so it's really tough for us to really open up our, cloak, if you will,
Mhm.
but we need to practice it because, you know, ministry is all about people. It's all about that's our end product, right? Is people. And so we need people to help us too.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the main things I see a lot when we get, when we sit across from a ministry partner and they're telling us, "Hey, we're so excited about this project and it's going to do the XYZ and it's going to reach all these people and et cetera." And then I just begin to ask them, "Well, how are you doing?" "Well, and usually when it starts like that, "Well, you actually do know that there's some things there that are weighing them down. And so being aware and then feeling comfortable really talking about what's really going on, um, it's just so healthy. And I just really would love to wave a magic wand over all the people that I love and just help them, start to step into some of this stuff because
Yeah.
it's just going to make your life so great. And here's like a last little bit of a hack. So when I started applying these same things in my own life, one of the things I began to realize is just how unaware I was of my own thinking, like you just said, my own feeling. And so I said, Lord, you know, you're going to have to teach me because I've lived so long ignoring all this stuff that's been blinking at me on my little dashboard or minimizing it and saying it's not important. And so
Mhm.
I just was reminded of the words of David in Psalm 139 when he cries out to God and he says, "Lord, search me and know me." And then he says, "Point out any offensive path within me and lead me along a path of everlasting life." So I used to just go for walks every morning and I would just hold my hands up as I walked around the neighborhood and I said, "Lord, search me and know me. Like, I need you to take a flashlight and point anything out in me that's offensive, that's unhealthy, that isn't fruitful." And then God isn't just gonna go, "Aha, right there." Then what does it say? "Lead me along a path of everlasting life." I want everlasting life. I want my ministry to be healthy. I want my family to be healthy. I want it to be life everlasting. And so as I just began doing that, it was amazing how God would bring things to my mind just as I prayed that scripture every day. And it was sort of like I just said, Lord, open me up and take a flashlight in the inside of my heart and just find stuff that I would never find on my own. And so that just worked for me. And it might not work for everybody, but it really worked for me. And it really started leading me into some really healthy places.
Nick, that is such a perfect verse to summarize what we talked about today. That really is. And I appreciated today because you pointed out three of the self limiting beliefs that you've seen most in your life, in other leaders, just in people in general. And then you've also given everybody a practical tool, a way to discover what some of their own private personal ones are. I mean, as they say, there's nothing new under the sun. So all the weird thoughts that we have, we can be guaranteed that there are other people having the same weird thought. But the enemy comes after us all in unique and very personal ways. So these are some of the common ones. So we can say, hey, these are common temptations. These are common things the enemy is saying. And then what are some of those other things that he's coming at me with? And so that's something that people can take a look at. They can take a look at these three things and then they can start to pay attention throughout the day. What other things that I'm saying to myself, how can I challenge those and see if they line up with the word of God? How can I present them in community and see how I can start believing more of what God said about me? That was great. Thank you so much for sharing that today, Nick.
Yeah, my honor. It really was. Yeah.
Well, and we will be posting show notes. So for anybody who wants to find out a bit more about what we talked about, they can dig into that later. Nick, how can people get in contact with you or find out about what you're doing through Gateway Center for Israel?
Yeah, if anybody that's listening wants to reach out, I'd be happy to hear from anybody, whether it's a question about anything we do on a ministry level or just a personal question. You can go to centerforisrael.com and check out what we're doing there, and then you can send me an email from there if you want to as well. It'll come to me quickly.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Nick, so much for sharing today. And for everybody who listened, we appreciate you joining us and make sure to tune in next week for our new episode.